Okay. Greetings from the Gem City, everybody. I'm Amelia.
All right. I'm Tom.
All right. And this week's story is from the very first chapter of the Gospel of Luke. About 2/3 of the way through the chapter, something like that. It follows on the heels of a story where the angel Gabriel comes and tells this young woman who's a virgin named Mary that she's going to bear a child. And so I'm going to tell the first part of this week's story, and then Tom's going to finish it off. All right. In those days, Mary set out, and she went with haste to a town in the hill country of Judea, where she entered the house of Zechariah and greeted Elizabeth. And when Elizabeth heard the sound of her greeting, the child within her leaped. Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit, and she cried out in a loud voice, "Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb. But how is it that the mother of my Lord should come and visit me? For when I heard the sound of your greeting just now, the child of my womb leapt with joy. Oh, blessed is she who has believed that what the Lord has said will be fulfilled."
Then Mary said, "My soul magnifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Savior. For he has looked with favor on the lowliness of his servant. And from now on, all generations will call me blessed. For the one who is mighty has done great things for me, and holy is his name, and his mercy is on those who fear him from generation to generation. He has shown strength with his arm. He has put down the mighty from their thrones and lifted up those of lowly estate. He has blessed and filled the hungry with good things, and the rich he sent away empty. He has helped his servant Israel in remembrance of his mercy that he promised to our ancestors, to Abraham and his descendants forever." And so Mary stayed with Elizabeth for about 3 months, and then she returned to her home.
All right, so that's the story. All right. Okay, so this story seems kind of unusual for a couple of reasons. Maybe the primary one is that it's about two women, and there aren't that many biblical stories that feature two women. Ruth and Naomi, that does come to mind. But so these two women, how people listening to the story, how old would they anticipate these women would be? I mean, we've heard some things previously in chapter 1, but why don't you tell us what you think their ages would be about?
Well, in terms of what Zechariah says, that my wife is advanced in years and is, by implication, clearly beyond the years of childbearing. So she would be in her late 40s. And the implication of the story is that Mary is a teenager, and that they would have, the listeners would have concluded, assumed, whatever, that she was, 15, 16, maybe as young as 14. So these are two remarkable women who have experienced something utterly remarkable for them in each case on the perimeters of childbearing.
All right, so at this point, we've learned from the previous story that Elizabeth is 6 months pregnant.
Right.
So why we have these two women, different ages, different stages of life, both with very unusual pregnancies. So we have kind of pre-birth stories in the story of Jesus. What is I don't know, what's the significance of that, the gospel?
Well, it's the prelude to the birth of Jesus. And it sets it in the context of divine action, that God has taken the initiative to establish the context for God's Son, and that God was not just present in the birth of Jesus, but that he was at work, and that Jesus was God's Son from before he was born, while he was still in the womb, while his very conception was related to and was an action of God.
Okay. I mentioned Ruth and Naomi before. Ruth was Naomi's daughter-in-law. In this case, what's the relationship between Mary and Elizabeth?
Well, the word that is used in Luke is sungenes, which means with family. Genes means genes, family descendants, family connections. It's sometimes translated as cousin, but any description of a relative would be appropriate as a translation of that word in Greek.
So
it's a very unusual word. It's the only time that it's used in the New Testament.
Oh. Is that why Mary went there? I mean, it says she went with haste, just as soon as she found out. Well, as soon as the angel left, it seems like, and she found out she was going to bear this very special child, even though she had not known a man, so to speak. Why did she run off and go to the hill country of Judea and stay with Elizabeth for 3 months?
Well, the implication in the story is that she was, I don't know, nervous, and that she was going to share this great joy that the angel had told her about, both about that she would get pregnant, but also Gabriel had said, that your relative Elizabeth has conceived in her old age and is now 6 months with her who was said to be barren. And so, for nothing is impossible with God.
Right.
So Mary is just, and I think that she just wanted to go for the sheer joy of it and sharing this remarkable thing that had happened to both of them.
Yeah, well, I also kind of wonder if it was, I mean, we don't know so much from Luke, but in Matthew's gospel, it's clear that there was some danger involved with her being pregnant and not yet actually married to Joseph. So maybe she was also going.
Protecting herself.
Yeah, for safety reasons.
Yeah, well, that's possible, but
yeah.
That doesn't seem to be the case because she went back home.
Yeah, that's true.
And,
yeah, face the music, so to speak. Right. Yeah. Okay, so Mary is often portrayed when people tell her story or talk about her as a very submissive person. Is that the sense you have of her in this story, or and in all these stories in beginning of Luke?
No, there couldn't be any greater difference between the submissiveness that has been sometimes attributed to her and the spirit in which she both responds to Gabriel. Here I am, a servant of the Lord. Let it be with me according to your word. But most of all, in the Magnificat, this song that she sings, there couldn't be anything more directly contradictory to a spirit of submissiveness than the politically radical way in which she portrays this, and her strength in praising God and saying, my soul magnifies the Lord. She is extremely assertive and powerful, a strong woman.
Mhm.
It's a remarkable song that is given to her, that she sings this praise of God. It's a wholly distinctive song. So couldn't be more different than submissive.
Right. Well, I don't want to run past the fact, or the important part of the story in the first part, the narrative part, that Elizabeth experiences the child within her, now at 6 months, leaping with joy.
Yes.
And those of us who have experienced pregnancy know, what it's like to have the baby move within.
Yeah.
And sometimes it can be, you can see it actually. So that's just a wonderful detail from women's experience in this story. And then of course it's not named here, but we will learn who this child is. So do we want to tell? Who is this child? Who is this child that's leaping in the womb with joy?
Yeah. That's good.
Who is it? Who is it? That's a
Well,
question.
Right. Who is it? What's the question?
Who's the child that is leaping in Elizabeth's womb?
Oh, well, it's John the Baptist.
Okay. Well, we don't know from the story, right?
Yeah, well, yes, you do, because Zechariah is told by the angel, you shall name him John.
Yeah, okay, but not from
And
this
he will be
particular,
great.
not from this particular story. It's not named there.
Right.
I just
Right.
wanted to bring up this Elizabeth bearing John, who's going to be John the Baptist, right?
Right.
Okay. What is the implication of Mary's radical praise for the activities of God for justice ministries today?
Well, I think of one of the striking things about this, and Amy Jill Levine made this observation, and I think it's really important, that God is one who remembers. God remembers God's promises. God has a good memory, and fulfills then the promises that he's made, not always right away, but over generations, that God fulfills God's promises. And in this case, the portrayal of God is one who radically transforms economic and political relationships. So he's put down the mighty from their thrones, exalted those who are lowly, the peasants is the implication of that. And the economy of the ancient world was a predominantly peasant economy. Probably 85 to 90% of people were involved in agriculture and were peasant farmers in various ways. So this is a story of the exaltation of those who were poor. So this is put down the rich, exalt the poor, lift them up. It's the stuff of revolution and of the transformation of values from the glorification of the rich to the glorification of the poor. And so the tradition of God's preference for the poor is in part derived from this saying of Mary. She's probably the most influential woman in human history in terms of the impact that she has had, and that the stories of her, of this conception and birth of Jesus has had on inspiring people, to do all sorts of things that are good. If you look up Marianists or Mary stuff on the internet, the list of organizations and communities and so on that have been formed around the admiration and adulation of Mary is astounding.
Mhm.
There's no woman, there's no other woman who compares, I think, in human history to the impact that the stories of Mary has had on people over the centuries.
Yeah. As you talk about her, sometimes it's called a song, isn't it? Or the Magnificat, isn't that?
Yeah,
her,
yeah.
I'm remembering, I believe there's a lot of similarity to Hannah's song
Yes,
when she finds out she's pregnant with Samuel. Is that correct? Am I remembering?
yes, yes, that's right.
So
There are similarities. There isn't anything anywhere near as radical
mhm,
politically in Hannah's song as there is in Mary's song.
Yeah.
But they are both songs of glorification of God for this great gift of pregnancy. In Hannah's case, like Elizabeth, waiting and waiting and waiting and thinking that she was going to be barren. And in Mary's case, for this great surprise that out of the blue.
yeah. All right. Any last thoughts about this story for the, I guess this is for the 4th week of Advent, I believe.
Well, I have two. First is, I have found in meditating and praying with this story that it is a source of great joy, and that to live into the experience of these two women and of their meeting like this in this place is, and of the spirit of Mary is really delightful and is a source of joy. So I would recommend that to everyone, to meditate, to tell this story, to learn it, internalize it, pray with it. It's a great, joyful story.
And Mary's, she's praying a prayer of praise, so we could all pray that prayer.
Yes.
Yeah.
The second is that this story is uniquely an inspiration for ministries of justice, for the valuing of and the care for the poor, and for the celebration of God's action to transform the economic systems of the world to bring about greater justice and greater equality between the rich and the poor.
Yeah.
So in terms of the implications of this, for example, in the United States, with the growing distance between the very rich and the poor, that God's action is to reverse that.
Yeah.
And that's what's reflected in Mary's praise of God, is the recognition that this is something that God is steadily doing in human history.
So if we want to be part of God's plan, then we need to work towards that ourselves. Yeah.
Towards justice.
Yep. All right, everybody, have a really good week during this special holy season.
Indeed.
Bye.
Blessings, peace, joy.